Welcome back to WaveCast, the official podcast of the Marine Institute of Memorial University. If you are new to the podcast, you should know that twice a month we publish episodes all about the stories of the work and life of the students and the staff here at the Marine Institute. In this episode, we sit down with our very own Arctic adventurer and research scientist in the Center for Fisheries Ecosystems Research, Dr. Maxime Geoffroy, who just returned from kayaking 50 days and 2,000 kilometers in the Canadian Arctic. Maxime embarked on this trip with a longtime friend, Simon Carrier, with a goal to kayak from Tuktoyaktuk in the Northwest Territories all the way to Pond Inlet in Nunavut. So here on the podcast to tell you all about it is Maxime. So, Max, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting.
It's nice to have you here because normally we talk about research-based things because you're my supervisor.
Correct.
So I'm glad that you've come to my side of the world and are on the science communication side. Now it's great. So before we get into the reason that you're here today, or the meat and potatoes of it, I was wondering if you can tell the listeners a little bit about your role at the Marine Institute and what you do for your research.
So I'm a research scientist within the Center for Fisheries Ecosystem Research. I've been here since 2017. My research interests comprise or in general, it's the marine ecology of pelagic ecosystem at high latitude, so mainly in the Arctic, but also in subarctic regions. So I mainly work in Labrador Sea, but also across the Canadian Arctic and the Eurasian Arctic as well.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get to studying the Arctic? What's your background in before? Did you always have a fascination with like these polar environments?
So I did. Actually, it's quite linked to that podcast and the expedition we're going to talk about because so I come from northern Quebec, in a region called Abitibi. And with the same partner I went for that expedition we're going to talk about when we were 18 between 18 and 20, we paddled the Arikana River, which was in my backyard as I grew up. And that river is flowing towards James Bay. And we always thought, okay, what's up there and further north? So that first real encounter with the north is when we decided to paddle the whole river and then reach James Bay and then paddle part of James Bay and then took the train back. So that was the first entrance to the world of the north. After that, I completed my studies in mechanical engineering, which was not really related to the north or marine biology and ecology. But then I went back to school for a master in marine biology, where I joined Louis Fortier's lab at Université Laval, and his team was working from the research icebreaker Amundsen and across the Canadian Arctic. So that's how I got into the Arctic world. I got really into it. So I developed the interest for the North through these expeditions and going in northern Quebec. But then after that, I solidified this interest by doing my master's, and then I followed up with a PhD work in the same environment, also in the Canadian Arctic, and then I continued in that field for the rest of my career.
Mm-hmm. So I think most people, when they're doing so the Amundsen, for example, we've talked about it on the podcast before, is a fairly luxurious ship. There's a lot of there's like a movie room, there's a gym, things like that. The food is great.
And plentiful.
And plentiful. And I think, and I've experienced this too before, when you tell my parents or my family back home, oh, like these Arctic expeditions, things like that, they think that you're out there, trying to survive for your life, when in reality, it's not the case. So I'm wondering, that experience you've had a lot. So what was it that then you said, okay, well, I want to be actually out on the ice and I want to be specifically in a kayak? Like, what is it that then made you think I want to do this specific trip with your friend?
Well, there are few aspects to it, but yeah, you're right. When we're on the ship, we have a connection to the north, and we study what is there, and it's we can say it's past the geographical exploration, but it's more the scientific exploration, which is very interesting too. But we don't have the same connection to the land, so we are mainly offshore. We don't stop that much in communities because we only do the crew change there, but it's mainly the airport, and we don't go ashore much, so we stay offshore, which is also interesting. But I always had this, so I've been going on in the Arctic for the last 16 years to do research, or every time I'm like, what would it be to be out there, and then how can I experience it in a different way, and could I paddle here or not? And so there's kind of a curiosity about what's out there and how is it not offshore but on the coast. So that's one aspect of why we decided to do that trip. And the other one is also to experience the Arctic at a slower pace. So even though the ship is not that fast, it will cruise between 8 to 12 knots usually. So that's between 16 and 24 kilometers per hour, which is not fast compared to a car, but it's fast compared to kayak. So it's also experiencing it at a slower pace and really taking the time to see what's out there and see what is there. And then another aspect, so that's kind of the challenge to how we're able to do it, how far we can go, and how can we experience it. And another aspect is trying to see, because we by studying that, we see the effect of climate change, but then going at a slower pace and going more in coastal areas and more the land-sea connection, we can see other aspects of climate change, experiencing what's out there. So that was also out of curiosity for the challenge, for the environment, but also about the experiencing what's happening out there and what other changes.
Mm-hmm. So at some point in the last couple of years, you had this plan that became a lot more solidified to do this. So at what point did you decide, I want to kayak the Northwest Passage and this is when we're leaving and these are the dates? Like, was this like a couple years ago? Really? Was this last year? Was it a couple weeks before? Like what was that process like?
So it's several steps. So with the same friend that we did the expeditions, whose name is Simon Carrier, and we grew up in the same hometown, as I mentioned. We completed a big trip in 2010 where we left from James Bay and then reached Cartwright on the Labrador shores inland. So we paddled, it was almost 2,000 kilometers as well, but inshore, following rivers and reservoirs and going over dams. And then we started talking about the next big expedition, and that's when we said, well, maybe the Northwest Passage would be a good one. So that was, 14 years ago, and then over the past 10 years, we've been talking here and there a bit more about it. And about 2 years ago, I got a message from Simon saying, I'm in contact with the kayak company for these really good expedition kayaks. Are we doing it or not? So, why not? So that's basically how it. So about 2 years ago, we started talking about it a bit more seriously. So we started buying the gear, training, and then planning for the maps, the looking at the different routes we would take, and then starting buying the equipment, and so over the past 2 years, and then let's say in the past year before we left, so we left in early July, late June, early July. A year before that, we started going to another level of planning where we really increased the speed of what we had to do and to be ready for that expedition. So it's a lot of time of planning on top of the expedition itself.
So what did that look like then? So to map out what you did. So you traveled from St. John's, and I'm just filling in what I know here, and you can tell me if it's right or wrong. You went from St. John's, you then went to Edmonton, correct? And then you drove all the way up to Tuktoyaktuk and then realized the ferry was broken. So then you went from a different place instead of taking the ferry, and then which added on an extra couple, like 100 kilometers or something, right? And then you traveled down in the Northwest Passage, like through the Amundsen Gulf, and then your plan was then to end in Pond Inlet.
Yeah, more or less, that's pretty much it. So basically, so my friend and actually my father, who drove us to the the starting point, was an adventure for him too. They drove from province of Quebec with the kayaks and all the gear, and then I met them. I flew from St. John's to Edmonton, and then we drove together and we went up. So it's from Edmonton. So from Quebec, it's a 7,000 kilometer journey to Tuktoyaktuk. From Edmonton, it's about 5,000 kilometers.
Wow.
We did it pretty much nonstop, and then you have to go through what they call the Dempster Highway, which is
the scariest highway in the world or something, right?
Well, I don't know if it's a case, but it's it's gravel road that goes from north of Whitehorse in Yukon, and that would go through up to Inuvik, and the last stretch was built a few years ago from Inuvik to Tuktoyaktuk, and then you reach the Arctic Ocean. And it's actually surprising because you have all these. Of course, everybody wants to do it. So you have these camper vans or vans that come from from Argentina, and you have people from all over the world that you meet on that road, because it's a big thing to do. People do it with vans, campers, or motorcycles, and but it is a rough road and quite remote. And then but before you arrived, and we were not sure we would be able to cross it because there were wildfires, as you know, on the west coast. But they had rain 2 days before we arrived, so it opened the day before we passed. So we were saying, okay, finally we're good to go. But before we arrive, a few hundred kilometers before we arrive in Tuk, there's a ferry that crosses the Mackenzie River, which is one of the biggest river that ends in the Arctic Ocean. And the ferry was down for, we didn't know how long, but by inquiring, they told us it would be at least a week. So it put us really behind if we had to wait. So what we decided, and Simon, my partner, said, we're going to paddle the 350 kilometers of the Mackenzie River. Like, I'm not sure about that. That's quite good. Yeah, but then when we put in the river, we realized the current was not that strong. So it would have taken us at least 6-7 days to do that. So what we did was to cross just on the other side of the river, where the other people were waiting for the ferry coming back south from Tuk, and they were idle as well. And we found a guide from Alaska, Andrew, who had a pickup truck, said, he just arrived from guiding a trip on a river on Banks Island in the Arctic. And said, if I find somebody that can look at my stuff, I can just remove everything, put your stuff in your kayak on my truck, and I'll drive you up there. So nice, that's good. So really nice fellow. So we did that, but it was already late at night. And then we started going up, but then there was a forecast for 3 days of stormy weather it took. So we decided to start, instead of waiting, we decided to start the same distance, but further south in an estuary that is south of Tuktoyaktuk. But then to reach that estuary, and our putting point was we had to look at the map and then the GPS, and then the guy was late during the day, needed to come back. So at some point we said, okay, I think that should be good. So just drop us here in the middle of nowhere in the swamp. We could see a lake on the map and on GPS that was 1 kilometer away. And from there we should be able to start traveling and reach our starting point. And there was full of flies, middle of nowhere, and the guy just dropped us there. And then finally, when and then we slept for a few hours, and it was hard to sleep, and it was 24 hours daylight. And anyway, so my friend at 2 a.m. said, I cannot sleep anymore, let's go. I was like, okay. So we were already quite sleep deprived because we drove for all this week without sleeping really, and then really short night. And so we start portaging really early at night, and then reached that lake 1 kilometer away and realized it didn't connect. So we had to come back, and then we found a really tiny creek that was going to the end of the estuary, but that, as you said, added another more than 100 kilometers to our distance. And we also had to paddle that old creek. You can imagine with kayaks that with all the food weight between 300 and 400 pounds each, 18 feet long, in this very tiny creek with little rapids and everything. It's really not designed for that. So that was hell. It took us 15 hours. And finally we reached really later the putting point, but we were further south than we expected to start. So after a really long day and all this adventure, we could at least start paddling on the ocean and going where we wanted to go.
And that wasn't even, your trip had just started.
Yeah, and we're already a little bit behind because of that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, even going from Edmonton up to Tuktoyaktuk, that in and of itself is already a trip that people do.
Yeah,
and
it's a trip, especially that we were so heavy that we realized the chucks on the Jeep were not strong enough. So we were, each time there was a bump, we were going and touching the wheel. So we didn't know if we'd make it or not, and we had trouble with the clutch. And then, but we made it there. So even going to our starting point was an adventure.
Yeah. So what did you talk about the 24-hour daylight, but what was it actually like when you were out there? Like, if you could paint the picture. So you have daylight all the time. What was it like?
So we were waking up at 3 a.m.
Oh, 3.
Yeah, but it's kind of intemporal, especially at the beginning. You don't really have... so we're adjusting our schedule at the beginning, but realized that was a little bit hard on our sleep schedule. So after about a week, we ended up with a more routine where we're waking up around 3. And then from there it was just go until we were back in the tent and sleeping at the end of the day. So at the beginning with all the gear and everything, and we're not really good. Like, it's complicated to fit all this stuff in these kayaks. As I said, they were designed for 21 days and we had 40 days. So at the beginning was taking at least 3 hours to pack everything, eat, get dressed up, and then load our kayaks, because we had to unload everything and load it back everything, because everything like was in small 10-liter dry bags that we had to fit, and they had like a big puzzle that we had to fit in the kayaks. But after some days, we were able to bring that back to 2 hours, and that's what we kept. It was the most efficient we could be. So from the time we woke up at 3, we were on the water around 5. And we had our little routine. So I was putting out the tent. My friend was starting cooking the oatmeal. And then as soon as everything was ready, we ate really quickly, and then we got dressed, packed everything, packed the kayaks, and at 5 we were on the water. Then you paddle. We were aiming to paddle between 10 and 11 hours a day, but we had days where we had to push for 12 or 13.5 hours. Depended a lot on because we were short on time, so we really, instead of following the shore, we were going from one point to the other with big crossings as well. Sometimes we cross bays, so we had a lot of crossing between 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers, a few crossings of 50 kilometers, one crossing of 65 kilometers, another one of 60 kilometers. So you're underwater for long days, and then if you hit currents or headwinds, then you have to reach the other side, so it could be 13 and a half hours or things like that. It's very tiring. But if we were having access to shore, usually we were trying to have a 5 to 10 minute break after 6 hours or so, just to grab have a leak and then grab a few nuts and then continue. But often we had to stay in the kayaks because we were offshore.
So
and then you when you stop after 10, 11, 12 hours, then it's the opposite. So I was putting the tent on, my friend was cooking the dry food, get changed in dry clothes if it's not raining or too cold, and then you eat, and then pack everything for the night, set up your bear motion detectors for the night, and then bring your shotgun with you in the tent in case bears are coming, and then you try to sleep 7-8 hours before. So basically, if we were stopping around between 3 and 5, we're in bed between 7 and 8, and then The ice we encountered only at the end, within the last week of our 2-month trip. We most of the time, and that was also the rationale behind leaving from the western side on our side. So because the ice starts melting more on the western side, and then so we were following the ice receding. So basically, the ice melts in the Mackenzie area, the Beaufort Sea area at the end of June. So we left early July. And then as we were progressing eastward, it was melting in front of us until we reach, and I guess we're going to talk about that later, but until we reached Prince William Island, and where it was not melted yet. So in contrast to lakes in the Arctic, the ice minimum, so the ice ends melting for the season in September. So everything that is still there in September, at the end of September, will start reforming again. So even though we say there's less and less ice in the Arctic, which is true. That's during the summer season and with the minimum ice season in September. But there are still areas where you have multi-year ice, what we call ice that last over the whole season and start forming again in the fall at the end of September, early October.
An ice that is not passable by a kayak.
Again, nothing is impossible. As the Arctic Cowboys showed, things can be done. It's always a level of what are your objectives versus the level of risk you're ready to take and the time frame you give yourself. So we had given ourselves up to 65 days of expeditions, knowing that the last stretch from Prince William Island, which is where you have Joe Ivan on the western or center western side, was our last exit point, last community we could diverge to before committing to a 1,000 kilometer stretch from the north of Prince William Island up to the north of Baffin Island. And for that 1,000 kilometer stretch, there's no exit point, there's no communities, there's no old runways from military base or anything like you will have further south. So we needed to be really sure we could reach the next community, which was Arctic Bay at the northern tip of Baffin Island, before the ice starts forming and it's becoming too harsh conditions and cold weather to exit. And we really didn't want it to finish in a rescue. So we were at the end of within the last week of August on the west side of Prince William Island. We encountered very heavy ice. The conditions for the coming days were northwest winds, which pushed the ice and compacted it even more on the western shore of the island. So we took the decision, after discussing quite a lot about, again, the objective and the level of risk, of not waiting there for, we would not know how long, because we thought that, well, if we have to wait here for another week, then it's becoming too late to reach safely the Northern Baffin Bay area before what we had put as a threshold of mid-September.
So when you're talking about you're going through these communities and you're making decisions as you go as sort of exit points, like you said, you gave yourself a certain number of days that you could maybe, I know even when you left, you said, I might be back in 2 weeks, I might be back, and there's sort of increments. So there's a lot of decisions that you have to make based off of weather, of course, and like in a sea ice state. But when you're up there, you don't have access to internet readily. So what was the support that you received from that? And were you talking to anyone outside that could send you weather, or what was that like?
Well, there's to a few points there. So first, we didn't cross that many communities. When we left, we actually left from south of Tuktoyaktuk. We didn't even leave from Tuktoyaktuk because the road was blocked because a ferry was down across the Mackenzie River. So we took the decision to live in this area that is south of Tuktoyaktuk. And the first community we met was after 35 days of paddling. It was Cambridge Bay, which was our halfway point. And we had a resupply there. We had sent some food by mail. But this being said, there are a few communities. You have Polatuk, you have Ulutaktuk and Kugluktuk, which are a few hundred kilometers from our route that we could have diverged if we had to on that first leg. But then we didn't. And Cambridge Bay is really the only community we stopped by and the only people we met. And because after that, we had the other leg towards Northern Baffin Bay, but that ended up in Joe-Ivan, but we didn't encounter any other communities back then. So that's for the trip itself. And then coming back to your question about our routing and information done. So we had the communication with few family members and partners where they so we briefed them on how to look at the weather, the sea ice conditions, and everything we needed to know really. And that we could contact them through InReach. So it's a satellite phone communications. We have GPS and also text messages that are 400 characters maximum each text. So it complicates a little bit how you communicate. And when needed, we could also contact them by satellite phone. However, we were recharging all these electronic devices with solar panels. And the sat phone batteries were a bit more complicated to recharge. So we tried to limit our communication through sat phone and mainly use the InReach. So we had a whole table with codes. So, the wind and at what time. So it was like a message we had every day where it was just a few thousands of numbers that meant something. When you read it in a certain order, it was kind of a code that our contact on the land could send us, that was sending us the information about the wind direction at different time during the day, strength, sea state, wave, and then also the sea ice concentration.
Conditions wise, was it cold? Was it windy? I know we saw pictures of a lot of bugs. Like what was that like?
It was everything. It changed a lot throughout the season, but also throughout the days. So at the beginning was actually quite warm. We had like between 20 and 30 degrees, and permafrost was melting super fast. And then there were a lot of bugs, and caribous were getting crazy because they were being harassed terribly by bugs, and us also. And then the tent was designed more for colder conditions, so it was impossible almost to sleep at night because it was so warm in the tent. It was not what I rated. And then all the flies. So that was not the best time. But then after that, after like a week or so, it became way colder. So then it went down. It could vary a lot during the day. So we could wake up at like 2-3 degrees in the morning. It could go up to 15-20 degrees in the afternoon, depending on the wind, the sun. But then it started being not as warm. So towards the last week, we were, the weather was below 0 at night. And when we were waking up around 3, but then was maybe between 5 and 10 during the day. but sometimes colder. So we're basically at the end paddling with 3 layers of wool and a dry suit and everything. Yeah.
So you said, you saw caribou then. Did you see any other wildlife that was striking?
Yeah, a lot. We saw, especially at the beginning on the western side, so we saw bowhead whales, which are the oldest mammals in the world. They can live a few hundred years. A lot of seals, so bearded seals, ring seals, belugas that were playing with us. We saw a lot of caribous. We saw at least a wolf, a lot of foxes, a lot of grizzlies at the beginning. They migrate further north, especially because it's so warm and there's wildfire. So there's way more grizzlies in the western side on the southern part of the Northwest Passage. What else? Yeah, muskox. Yeah, so we saw muskox, and yeah, so that was the fun part of it. But most of them we saw within the first 10 days or so, and after that you reach the eastern part of Amundsen Gulf and the southern shore of Victoria Island, and there you have way less wildlife. So it was a lot of birds, though. We saw a lot of geese and ducks and migratory birds, so it's really where they go. Which was interesting because you could see during the season, at first you had the chicks and they were a bit older and they can start swimming around us and then trying to escape us. And then by the end, it was fall already and they were flying south even with the newborn chicks were starting flying south with the rest of the geese. So, but yeah, other than birds for the last part, it was mainly just flat rocky islands that you go from one point to the other. Mm-hmm. So not as scenic as the western part.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's nice. I think it also speaks to your point that you were talking about earlier, how you're seeing things at a slower pace, but you're also seeing things at a much longer time scale too. So being able to see like migratory changes, that's a fairly unique thing that you got to see firsthand.
Yeah, no, it was. Yeah. And you see that it's going relatively quick. The productive period and the summer is really short. So this 2-month period is really the ice-free window we had, and as we saw, we were tried to push a little bit more, but ice conditions already were complicated.
Kind of like in Newfoundland here too, where everything is sort of a bust all at once, and the capelin, the whales, and the puffins.
Same thing, definitely. You really see that Newfoundland is really subarctic, so a lot of things that were similar, but still, even though we think we have a short summer, it's the further north you go, it's even shorter over there.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that while you were up there that I thought about a lot is I'd think, okay, what am I doing today? And then I'd think, what is Max doing today? And is he in heavy seas or is he in sea ice? Like I just had no idea. Yeah. And I'd love to know more about, because with sea ice, it's flat calm. Yeah. And that's the nice part. So without sea ice, you must have run into some waves.
Yeah, we had some pretty bad weather and wind, so it's quite windy up there. It can get quite windy, and as I said, to be able to do the distance we wanted to do, we needed to almost go straight, right? So we could not follow the coast. So we were paddling from one point to the other with being quite exposed, and that needed to have really good weather forecasts, as mentioned, from our contact down south. And then to plan our route based on these conditions. So when we had long crossings to do, we realized that you cannot commit to that if the wind is increasing. Mm-hmm. If you start at limit conditions in terms of waves, but it's decreasing, then it'll be okay. If you start with somewhat wavy, but then you're going to increase if you are 6 hours in and from any kind of land, then you still have to paddle these 6 hours in heavy seas. So that we realized quick enough, and you really need to plan. As I mentioned, it's hard. These kayaks are heavy, so you cannot just surf on the beach and then pull your kayak on the beach. You need to have small waves when you land and when you launch also. So we needed to look at the map and say, okay, this bay or this point should be sheltered from the direction of the wind, but the wind might switch, so we really have good forecasts. And sometimes we needed to have other forecasts. So you can also get forecasts on InReach directly, so satellite forecasts and messages. Sometimes we're ordering those so that we're gonna adapt and try to get to that point, and we should be sheltered. But that we learned the hard way, because at some point we crossed a cape that is called Cape Bathurst, and that was after the first week. So we had this, as mentioned, there was this storm in Tuktoyaktuk that prevented us from leaving from there. So we left from that estuary because one of the reasons, because it was somewhat sheltered. Even though we had strong winds, there was not enough fetch to build the sea state. And then, but we didn't realize, because we were kind of sheltered from that. We should have known it, but I mean, you get into a mood and a routine, and you don't think about these things. And people had told us that Cape Bathurst, there was some crashing and waves to be careful. And when we arrived there were indeed crashing waves, but they were crazy crashing waves, like for kilometers it's all shallow sandbanks, and they were crashing and crashing. So we're just following that, trying to find a place where we could actually turn the cape and to reach Franklin Bay, which is a large bay. And then when we finally found a small passage where it was not breaking, it was just big waves but not breaking. We said, okay, I think we should be able to go across this tiny passage and then hit these waves. They were headwinds, and so we made it. It was scary, but then we turned the cape and we started going on the other side, and then we paddled for another hour in these waves, thinking that it was just because it's the cape and it's going to be okay afterwards. But then we realized that the whole ocean, as far as we could see, was just huge breaking waves. There was no way we could land on the shore. They were breaking hundreds of meters offshore because they were too big. So then, and I remember being there for my master and PhD, and I remember it was like hundreds of kilometers of cliffs in Franklin Bay. And then so we put up both our kayaks together and look at the map, and I said, I think we're trapped here. There's no way we can land, and then if we try to land there, for sure we're gonna drown. There's no way we can, and we're gonna break the kayaks before we arrive on land, and that's it. So what do we do? And then so we had to take these decisions that we were like being bounced around by the waves, and then trying to look at the maps and take a decision there. And then the only way, it was scary, and then the only thing we could do was trying to go back on the same route we took, and just retrack our whole track and come back where we were that morning. So we had to, and that was the end of the day. So we had to paddle again all these hours in this really tough seas and trying to find that narrow passage in between all these crashing big waves. So my friend said, I think I recorded. So he said, I recorded the track on my GPS. So we're going to follow that track in the waves and try to find that tiny passage in between the crashing waves. Mm-hmm. But then the tide current was against us. So at some point we started entering that narrow passage with crashing wave on both sides of us and this big wave train where we were in. And then and I said, how far are we from the end of the passage? So 1.5 kilometers, but I could see we were going really slow. And we look at the GPS and we're going 1 kilometer per hour if we were paddling really, really hard. So we had to go this 1.5 hour in that really nasty passage. Then we finally made it, but at the end it was just sucking us out because of the current, of the tide current. But yeah, so you could not stop. You had to give everything you had to be able to pass. And we finally made it on the other side, completely exhausted.
Where you started?
Yes. And then we're able to make it to a landing spot that was full of grizzly tracks and grizzly air. And then, we spent the night there until the grizzly woke us up in the tent the morning after. Well, they didn't woke us up. We were awake, but came towards the tent the morning after,
What did you do in that? Did you just stay quiet, or did you?
No, because we tried to scare them, but it attracted them. So we had a rifle, a shotgun. So we had to launch a few flares and bear bangers and make some noise with the slug until they finally turned around and ran away.
So you were in the tent, but you could hear them wrestling around?
Well, we were waking up, so we opened the flaps, and then my friend goes out and said, well, there's 2 grizzlies on the beach coming at us. So we came out, and then but by the time we were able to scare them, they were maybe 15 meters from us.
And throughout all of this time, you're still sticking to your schedule where you're going to bed really early and you're waking up incredibly early.
Yeah. Well, that day we didn't wake up that early because there were still strong winds and bad weather. So we overslept. Well, not overslept, but we were rested a bit and waited for the wind to die down. Mm-hmm. And we left, I don't know, midday that day. So
you said that there were a couple other days where you had extra days where you were just resting or you were waiting out. So how many times did that happen?
Well, first, after that event, then we reevaluated a little bit our approach. So, we were really pushing to make these 50 or 55 kilometers per day, no matter what. And then on average, I would say, look, we need to be humble. It's the ocean, the weather is going to decide. We cannot push it like that for the 2 or 2.5 months coming because it's too dangerous. And then we reevaluated a little bit our approach. And then when sea states and conditions were becoming bad and dangerous. Like before it happened, we were stopping. So it was not too bad. We had so this half day there at Cape Bathurst, then we had another bit more than 2 days where we're stranded in our tent in bad weather on the eastern side of Amundsen Gulf. And then we had one more day of bad weather towards the end. And other than that, we were able to at least progress during every single day.
Now, did you see any other ships or people other than in the communities the few communities that you did pass? Did you see any other?
Not so many. We saw at some point 3 tents far away. I don't know if they were hikers or something, so we didn't talk with the people. We saw a week before we arrived in Cambridge Bay, we saw people from Kogluktuk. At one point, we did a crossing, and when we arrived at Victoria Island, there was a family of Inuit people that were there for the week at their cabin to hunt, and they saw us coming, so they came with their quad, and they were really nice. So it was nice to chat with other people for some time, and they had killed the caribous. They brought us some fresh caribou stew, so it was quite nice change. But then that was it until Cambridge Bay, and then after Cambridge Bay. We saw at some point the Louis Saint Laurent, so the Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker that is based in St. John's.
Wow!
We saw it far away as we were camping, but with the binoculars we could see it was the Louis Saint Laurent, and also the sea lift, so the cargo ship that goes from one community to the other. So we also saw it from far. Actually, there Louis Saint Laurent was escorting the sea lift. Yeah, but that's pretty much it. The rest of the time it was just the two of us.
Wow. Hopefully the conversation was good.
It was okay. It's an old friend. We've known each other for 30 years. So we had all old stories and stupid things we did in our first expeditions and things we've done. So it was good laughs, but also some strong discussions. It was quite humbling for me. So my friend is faster than me, is stronger, is more pushy, is more driven. So I was more sometimes saying, okay, I think 11 hours is good. We don't go for the 13 hours. Yeah, but we could push a little bit more. So look, that's what I have in me. I think if we do that, I'll be too tired tomorrow. And he would have done it, and also at the end he would have waited and maybe push more. At the same time, I think I was bringing a knowledge I've done more sea kayaking than him, even though he did a lot of river kayaking and expeditions, and he's really good. And I've known a little bit more about the Arctic and sea ice and how to be more maybe careful in these kind of environments. So I guess at the end it was a good mix. But so we had some good conversations. But under the water, usually we're not talking that much. Once in a while we're a little bit. But then my friend was faster than me, so really the guy was usually in front of me, and I was trying to catch up until he stopped and waited for me. So.
Did he ever take out a tow line?
He did, which was very frustrating from the beginning. At first, the first few days before I got my expedition shape, even though I trained for it, I got a few days where he had to pull me at least for part of the day, and that was very discouraging. It was like, I will not be pulled for the whole... This being said, tow line, you still need to paddle. If not, that doesn't. But so it's mainly to keep the distance between boats. But I'd say for me, it took about 500 kilometers before I really got the hang on it, and I could not easily, but more easily do the full day and without as much suffering.
And of course, too, it comes down to technique, and with kayaking, where there's a lot more like longevity-wise, you find what works for your body.
Really small, like just reaching like half an inch further makes a big difference over the whole day, and then, but also the way you need to be careful, because things that you can do, and you do go for 3-4 hours training, and we did a lot of training in the year before, but at some point you realize, oops, that creates like a bit of tension in my shoulder, and then so you start having tendinitis, and then sitting for really long hours like that nonstop in a kayak is not very good for your body. So you end up having a lot of joints and nerves and pinched nerve and things like that you always need to manage and think, because if you let it go, then you don't want to stop the expedition, right? So.
When you go on a vacation, the one thing that you really want for yourself is to sort of put part of your brain aside and to be focused on the present moment and just do something completely different. And as much as this doesn't sound like, I think some people who might be listening to this might think, oh, this sounds like a horrible vacation. Why would anyone want to do that? But at the end of the day, you got to have this really unique experience that you focused on for that amount of time. And that's the best part about a vacation, because you probably weren't worried about what was happening outside of just, okay, I need to fix my kayak, I need to do this thing, I need to wake up, I need to check the weather, I need to do all these things. So was that what it was like?
And that's also the goal of all these kind of trips, is that you're really in the moment. So if you start thinking and not concentrated on you do, the next wave can be a bad one for you and collapse you, capsize you. So yeah, you're right. You're really in the moment. You're always looking at the sky for any sign of change in weather, any sign of change in the waves, direction, currents. So you're really in the moment, which we are not enough normally. Same thing when you're sleeping. Even if you're sleeping, you're always like, okay, is there a bear coming? Is there any animals? So you're always aware of your surroundings, which keeps you grounded. We kind of lose that. So I like to go back in the woods, and not necessarily for longer trips like that, but a lot of outdoors for this kind of reason. It grounds you back to the essential and nature and important things. So that's one thing definitely, and that was really a good experience for that. You just disconnect for 2 months. There's also long moments, like 10, 11, 12 hours in a kayak just paddling. It's a long time to be with yourself and your thoughts. So yeah, sometimes you wake up in the morning and you're like, okay, I then start thinking about something. Okay, no, I keep this thought. I've got that. I can keep my mind busy for at least 2-3 hours with that today. So if I really stretch it, and so yeah, it was challenging. It was hard mentally. I think more for me than for my partner, who was a bit more driven. But yeah, so it's we went through it, but it was not easy, especially at the beginning. It became actually more easy. As you go, you get more in the vibe, and then at some point it's more your routine. It's a bit strange. But yeah, I'd say it took at least a month before I could really be more in the flow.
What was it? Can you talk more about what it was like mentally?
Yeah, well, you need to, because it's not necessarily fun, especially when you do long crossing. If you're in the fog or looking at a really distant point for like 10, 11 hours, it's just, you paddle towards a point. And there's no change in scenery, nothing around, and you just go and paddle, and and you start, after a few hours, you start having a few like pain in your joints, pain in your shoulder, pain in your nerves, and you want to move, but you can't. So you need to completely forget about that and start thinking about other things. So yeah, but that's also another thing. So one other reason why we do these things, that's something we discuss, is to appreciate the comfort and what we have when we're not in these kind of trips. So it's also make you realize everything we have and that we take for granted, and that our life is easy.
So are you suggesting that everyone kayaks the Northwest Passage?
No, but I'm suggesting that everyone try to at some point, actually in the Western world where we are very comfortable, don't want to talk for other parts of the world, which they already have their struggle way worse than that. But in our comfort, I think getting out of comfort and getting in nature and doing something, it doesn't have to be that. Everybody has their own objectives and challenge, but just getting sometimes a bit out of your comfort makes you appreciate it, and also put things in it relativize things, right? So some things that you might think sometimes that are, it's terrible, it's rough. Well, you say, well, I've seen worse than that, right?
It puts things into perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Puts it into perspective.
Yeah, the discomfort of things. It's I heard someone say the other day that you grow in discomfort.
Yeah, definitely. That was the goal, was to get this reality check once in a while and have longer trips like that are uncomfortable, so that you can come back and say, look, life is good.
And I also wanted to talk about when you arrived at your junction point where you could either continue or you could stop. There was a moment where you had to say, well, listen, we're going to have to stop. So were you disappointed in that? Were you proud still of what you'd accomplished?
It's a good question. It was done in few periods, and I'll be honest with that. So before we arrived in Cambridge Bay, when we didn't know there would be ice or no, we knew it could be possible. We saw that we started because... So we had a really ambitious plan. As I said, we started a little bit later than expected because of all these reasons. When we were driving up, we had some few days delayed days. We encountered more currents and stronger, and then we changed a little bit the way we approach. So we could not keep, even though we were doing long days, we could not keep the same progression as we would do when we do expeditions down south on the river, for instance, where we can just push it and no matter what. And because of that, we started realizing, and my friend was like, oh, it's going to be an 80-day expedition and we're going to end at the end of September. And then started minding us for that. And I go, yeah, I'm not, first, I'll be too tired mentally and physically for that. And also, as I mentioned, I've been in the Arctic at the end of September. And I'm not saying it's not possible, but I want to be there when you're really at the edge of the ice starting forming again, it's below zero. And at some point, I needed to come back for work too. So I already told them, before we arrived in Cambridge Racing, which was about our midway point, look, we're a bit late. I'm not committing for 80-day expedition. For me, my cutoff is being back mid-September. I think that's safe, realistic, gives us time to come back to work in a reasonable amount of time. It's going to be at the end of the somewhat good season. So if we're not able to reach that next point when we arrive at the end of Prince William Island. It's actually King William. I say Prince William, it's King William Island. We're gonna turn around and stop in Joe Island, which was another 300 kilometers, but it at least was not a stretch of 1,000 kilometers of committing further north. And we agreed on that, and we also said, okay, we try it. We go at the starting point of the island. If we're able, with conditions and the progression, we're able to make it in a reasonable amount of time, we push for it. If not, we come back. And if we have ice before that, then the environment will have decided for us, and then we'll turn around. So that's what we had agreed on. So we knew it could happen, right? It's not as if it's like, oh, finally our plan is collapse. And I always said, but before starting, we see how far we can go. We're going to try it. But we still push for it. We still did the biggest days we could before we arrived to that island, because we had good weather. So we were making a really good time, and probably like an average of 55 kilometers per day. So when we decided to turn around, it was a bit of disappointment. But again, more for my partner than for me, I think. For many reasons, it was maybe more driven than me. But also, working in the Arctic, I had seen the last part was actually the nicest part. You have glaciers there. It's the Eclipse Sound area, Northern Baffin Base is very scenic and beautiful. But I've seen it, so it was not the same for me. Even though it would have been a different experience, than for him was kind of his goal, and he might never see it again. So there was one chance that he could see it. So I think for that he was more sad, maybe not disappointed, and he understood the situation, and we all agreed that was the safest thing to do. And he has kids, we didn't want to push it in a way. But he was sad, probably more than me, and I think that was one of the reasons.
Mm-hmm. So you felt maybe there was a bit of relief also too, then that
honestly for me, yes, to some extent, because it was stressful to commit to that large stretch, knowing that we're getting in harsher weather conditions, sea ice conditions, and even more is isolated. Mm-hmm. So again, we would have been able to make it in a reasonable amount of time, I think we would have pushed for it. But now, given that we were delayed by sea ice, I think it was the most best decision to take. So I was okay with that decision.
As one of your students, I agree, and I supported that decision.
Anyway, we did 2,000 kilometers across the Arctic. Mm-hmm. We came back in one piece. We had no rescue. We had a few stories, as I mentioned, but basically when we were not playing safe, because we didn't realize we were not playing safe, but when we could take decision and learning was part of the whole expedition, learning how to navigate, camp, mm-hmm. progress in that environment. And I think we can say we achieved that. So the idea was not to be riskful and then push it to the end, and so I think it was, in that sense, to me, it was a success. We learned a lot. We achieved something that to us was a good achievement. It was a bit shorter than we'd have expected, but we knew it could happen, and we came back with our rescue in one piece, and then mm-hmm. we can continue, and we're able to come back on time to go back to our real lives.
How has this trip changed your perspective maybe on your research, or has it given it a different meaning?
Yeah, it's a good one. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the idea was to experience I'll say two things. So first, it kind of comes from what we've seen during my thesis, that the western side of the Canadian Arctic is more of a hotspot. That's really where we had most of the wildlife. After that, the old Kitikmeot area, which is a central Canadian Arctic, there's not as much wildlife there. So that really confirmed that, and I could see that firsthand. And the other one was how important are the impact of climate change, how fast they are. So we all hear about, for instance, permafrost thawing and melting, but then there it was not just once in a while, it was for full week and a half. We could see the coast of the islands with the ice layer in the middle that was just melting and collapsing, and makes like thunder noises. And then you have to be careful when you paddle, because you have these huge parts of the coast that are just collapsing out of sudden. And same thing when you're camping, you really need to take a camping spot where it will not collapse on you during the night, but you could hear it on the sides that was collapsing. So that the speed at which it happened. So we had that. Seeing more grizzlies was also because there were wildfires and warmer conditions further south. We hear about the wildfires having an impact in the Arctic, and we could see that we had at least a week where we had southwest winds, and we had zero visibility. It was hard to breathe because we had all the smoke and the smog from the wildfires from BC and Yukon that was coming. So definitely it has an impact on the ecosystem, and we knew it from reading it, but experiencing it from firsthand gives you a different feel for it and how fast and drastic these are. Same thing for sea ice. I mean, yes, we got stuck by sea ice, but the reality is that these kind of trips were not possible in 1 year a few decades ago, just because the sea ice conditions, even in the summer, were way more. The ice breakup and ice formation were the ice-free season was shorter, right? So
I know that you have a strong aversion to the words Arctic explorer, because you're not an explorer. These places have been explored, but there has to be another word to describe Arctic adventure or something, because
maybe adventure. It was an adventure, definitely. I'm more a scientific explorer, so that's good. We do scientific exploration, but in that case, it was more adventure than exploration. Yeah.
Well, either way, I think it's great. Thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you for inviting.
We hope that this episode helps remind everyone to get outside, to take a breath, to take a slow down, and really admire the world that's around us. As always, if you have questions for Maxime or suggestions for future episodes, you can always send an email to wavecast@mi.mun.ca. Well, thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.